The last meal I ever made for Daniel was a lamb stew. I had been simmering it for 3 hours. The kitchen smelled like rosemary and red wine, and something warm I can only describe as effort. I ladled it into 2 bowls, set his down first, the way I always did, and sat across from him with my hands folded in my lap, waiting. He picked up his spoon. He took 1 bite. He set the spoon down, and then he turned to me with that particular smile. The one that isn't really a smile at all. It's something that lives in the corners of his mouth, patient, almost practiced. "Did you forget the salt again?" he said. I hadn't forgotten the salt. I had added salt 3 separate times. I tasted it each time. I knew the dish. I had made it a dozen times before. My mother taught me this stew on a rainy Sunday when I was 11 years old, and I had never once made it wrong. But I pick up my spoon. I taste it, and I say quietly, "I'll remember next time." That's the moment, not the leaving, not the night I packed a bag, not the morning I handed him the papers. This is the moment I want you to understand first. A bowl of lamb stew, a December evening, and me sitting there tasting something that is perfectly fine, deciding that it isn't, because he said so. 7 years of dinners, 7 years of that smile. And I say, "I'll remember next time." I need you to understand who I was before Daniel. Not to make him a villain and me a saint, because that's not the story. The story is more ordinary than that, and ordinary things have a way of being more painful. Before Daniel, I cooked because I loved it. That's the whole reason. No performance, no audience, just me and a cutting board, and the particular satisfaction of making something from nothing. My apartment in my 20s smelled like garlic on Fridays, and cinnamon on Sunday mornings. My friends came over and sat on the kitchen counter and talked while I worked. Margot used to say that being in my kitchen felt like being held. That's who I was. I met Daniel at a work conference. He was funny. That's genuinely true. He was funny in a way that made a room lean toward him. He noticed me across a breakfast buffet, and he walked over holding a plate of fruit and said, completely deadpan, "You look like someone who knows what she's doing. Can I follow you around today?" And I laughed, and I thought, this one is different. We dated for 2 years. In that time, he ate everything I made and loved it. He would call his friends and say, "You have to come over, Nora made her pasta." He sat on the counter the way my friends used to. He watched me cook, and he said it was one of his favorite things about me. I believed him. The first time he said something cutting about a meal, a risotto, I think, that was slightly over-reduced, he passed it off as a joke so smoothly that I genuinely thought I had misheard him. He laughed. I laughed a little. He kissed me on the cheek. We had been married maybe 4 months. I don't remember tasting the risotto myself. I remember looking at it afterward and deciding it probably had been a little off. Margot was the first person to say it out loud. She came for dinner one Saturday, about 3 years into the marriage. I made a roasted chicken with lemon and herbs, a dish I could make in my sleep, a dish I loved. Daniel sat at the head of the table, and somewhere between the first glass of wine and the bread basket, he looked at the chicken and said, "It's a little dry this week, yeah." Margot's fork stopped halfway to her mouth. She put it down slowly. She looked at the chicken. She looked at me. Then she looked at Daniel with an expression I had never quite seen on her face before, something very still, something carefully assembled. "It's delicious," she said. Not, "I think it's fine." Not, "I don't notice." She said it like a statement of fact, like a correction. Daniel laughed. "You don't have to be diplomatic, Margot." "I'm not being diplomatic," she said. "It's one of the best things I've eaten this month." There was a pause. Daniel reached for his wine. The conversation moved on. But after dinner, when Daniel was in the other room, Margot found me at the sink. She stood next to me, and she didn't say anything for a moment. She just watched me rinse the plates. "Nora," she said finally. "It was a little dry," I told her. "He's right. I think the oven was running hot." She took the plate from my hands. She set it down. "Look at me," she said. I did. "The chicken was perfect," she said, "and you need to hear that from someone." I wanted to argue. I felt this sudden, strange pressure behind my eyes. Not quite tears, just the threat of them. The kind that comes not from sadness, but from someone naming something you've been refusing to name yourself. He just notices these things, I said. She held my gaze for another moment. Then she nodded once, slowly, and handed me back the plate. She didn't push. Margot is smart enough to know that pushing doesn't work on me. But I think about that moment in the kitchen, her putting down the plate, making me look at her. And I think she was planting something. Something she was willing to wait for. I want to tell you what 7 years of small cuts does. It doesn't happen all at once. That's the part that's hard to explain. If Daniel had said something truly cruel on our wedding night, I would have known immediately what it was. I would have had language for it. I would have told someone. But it's a comment about the salt. It's a raised eyebrow when I describe a new recipe at a dinner party. It's him saying to his colleague with a fond laugh, "Nora tries very hard in the kitchen." It's the way he tilts his head at a dish, not eating, just looking, and then reaches for the hot sauce without saying anything at all. By year 3, I was consulting him before I cooked. What do you feel like? Is this too heavy? Do you think this will turn out all right? I was asking permission for decisions I'd made alone and freely for 10 years before I met him. By year 5, I stopped inviting people for dinner. It felt too exposed, to cook for people and then have him say something in front of them, dressed as a joke, and watch everyone decide whether to laugh. By year 6, the cooking was still there, but something had left it. I followed recipes exactly where I used to improvise. I didn't taste as I went. I stood at the stove with a kind of blank efficiency, and when I sat down to eat, I had already decided the food was probably wrong. And then there was the lamb stew, and I said I'll remember next time. And somewhere inside me, very quietly, a door closed. I didn't make a decision. That's the thing. There was no dramatic morning where I stood in the kitchen and said, "I'm done." Nothing so clean or cinematic. It was just that the next week came, and I didn't cook. I ordered takeout on Tuesday. I made a bowl of cereal on Wednesday night. On Thursday, I heated up soup from a can, standing at the stove in my coat because I hadn't even taken it off yet. Daniel noticed on Friday. "What's for dinner?" he said, setting his bag down by the door the way he always did. "I don't know," I said. "I didn't make anything." He looked at me. "Are you sick?" "No." "Do you want to order something?" "Sure," I said. He ordered Thai food. We ate it at the table in the cardboard containers. He didn't say anything about the food. I ate my pad, see-you, and I looked out the window and I noticed something peculiar. A lightness in my chest that I didn't recognize at first. Like something had been removed. Like a sound I'd been hearing so long I'd stopped noticing it had finally stopped. I didn't cook the next week either. Or the week after that. There is a particular kind of silence that opens up in a marriage when one person stops doing a thing they have always done. It's not loud. It doesn't announce itself. It just sits there in the evenings, in the way the kitchen stays clean. Daniel started making dinner on Tuesdays. Pasta, usually. He could do pasta. He never asked me to cook. He never asked me why I'd stopped. I think he was waiting for me to circle back on my own, the way I always had. I didn't circle back. I had started going to the gym in the evenings. Not to lose weight, not for any particular goal, just to have a reason to be somewhere else, moving my body through space in a way that had nothing to do with him. I went on Mondays and Wednesdays and sometimes Fridays, and I came home flushed and tired and vaguely restored. It was at the gym that I ran into Leo Castillo for the first time outside of work. Leo was a graphic designer 2 floors down from my office. We knew each other the way you know someone in a building, by sight, by elevator small talk, by the occasional good morning in the lobby. He was tall and quiet, and had the specific kind of humor that doesn't announce itself, that you only catch if you're paying attention. He was stretching near the rowing machines one Wednesday night when I came in. We nodded at each other. He said, "You live in this neighborhood?" 3 blocks, I said. "Same," he said. That was the whole conversation. But afterward, walking home, I noticed I was walking a little faster than usual. Not for any particular reason. Just moving. Daniel's mother, Sylvia, came to stay for a week in March. I had always had a complicated relationship with Sylvia. She loved her son in the way some mothers do, completely and without much critical examination. She was not unkind to me. She was warm, in fact, in small, practiced ways. She remembered my birthday. She asked about my work, but she had spent 30 years smoothing over things about Daniel that perhaps should not have been smoothed over, and I think she knew that, in some part of herself, she didn't visit very often. She arrived on a Sunday, and by Monday evening she had noticed the kitchen. "You haven't been cooking," she said. We were sitting at the kitchen table with tea, Daniel out at a work dinner. "I've been tired," I said. She held her mug with both hands. She looked at the stove. She looked at the clean counter. "He used to talk about your cooking," she said, "when you two were first together. He used to call me and say—" and she stopped. Something passed across her face that I couldn't quite read. "He was proud of it," she said. "Yes," I said. We sat with that for a moment. "Nora," she said, and the way she said my name had something unfamiliar in it, something that wasn't the usual warm gloss, something careful. "Is everything all right between you two?" I looked at my tea. "We're fine," I said. She nodded. She didn't push. But she set her mug down, and she put her hand over mine for just a second. One quick pressure, and then she let go, and changed the subject. That night I lay awake for a long time, thinking about the way her face had changed when she started to say he was proud of it. What had she been about to say before that? What had she caught and swallowed? I thought I knew. And knowing it, knowing that even she could see it, and had always looked away. That settled something in me, not anger, something quieter, something more final. It was Margot who, 6 weeks later, said the thing I had been slowly building toward saying myself. We were having lunch, outside, in a cafe where the sun was doing that early spring thing where it feels like a promise. I was eating a salad and she was eating a sandwich, and she said, apropos of very little, "Have you thought about what you actually want?" "In terms of what?" I said. She gave me a look. "I don't know yet," I said. "That's honest," she said. I put my fork down. I looked at the table. I thought about the lamb stew. I thought about Sylvia's hand on mine. I thought about standing at the stove in my coat, eating soup from a can with a quiet lightness in my chest. "I think I've been making myself smaller for a very long time," I said. Margot didn't say I told you so. She didn't say finally. She just looked at me steadily and said, "Yeah, you have." "It wasn't all him," I said. "No," she said. "Some of it was you letting him." That landed harder than I expected. Because it was true. And because it meant this was something I had participated in, which was both worse and somehow more manageable, because what you have participated in, you can also choose to leave. "I don't know what happens next," I said. "You don't have to," she said. "You just have to know what you're done with." I sat with that all the way home. And I did know. I had known for a while, maybe longer than I'd admitted. I was done being the person who tasted a perfect stew and decided it was wrong because someone told me so. I told Daniel on a Thursday evening, not shouting, not crying. I had spent enough time inside this feeling that by the time I said it out loud, it came out the way things do when they've been ready for a while, without drama, without performance. He was sitting at the kitchen table with his laptop, and I sat down across from him and I said, "I think we should talk about separating." He looked up. There was a long pause, long enough that I could hear the refrigerator hum. "What?" he said. "I've been thinking about it for a while," I said. "Nora, I'm not angry," I said, and I meant it. "I'm just done." He looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen before. Not the smile with its patient corners. Something actually unguarded. Something that might have been panic or grief, or something that had no name yet. "Is this about the cooking?" he said. The question surprised me so much I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was so exactly right and so exactly wrong at the same time. "It's about 7 years of dinners," I said, "and all the other things that look like dinners." He opened his mouth, closed it. I don't want to relitigate everything, I said. I'm not building a case. I'm just telling you where I am. He stood up. He walked to the window. He stood there with his back to me for a long moment, and I watched his shoulders and I felt nothing that surprised me. Just a kind of steady, sad clarity. The clarity you feel when you finally do the thing you've been circling for months. I didn't know it was that bad, he said. And I thought about all the evenings. The tilted head, the raised eyebrow, the hot sauce, the chicken, the stew. I know, I said. That's part of it. The weeks after that had a strange texture. Daniel moved to the guest room. We were civil in the way that people are when they have both chosen the same difficult thing, even if they arrived there differently. He made his own dinners. I made mine. The kitchen became a shared neutral space. We moved around each other carefully, like two people who have agreed, without saying so, to be gentle. I started cooking again. Not for him, just for me. The first thing I made was scrambled eggs at 11 o'clock on a Saturday night, standing in the kitchen in my socks with a glass of red wine on the counter. I seasoned them the way I liked, with too much pepper and a little creme fraiche, and I ate them standing at the counter, and I did not taste them and decide they were wrong. They were right. They were exactly right. I made my mother's lamb stew the following Sunday. I simmered it for 3 hours and the kitchen filled up with rosemary and red wine and something warm. I ladled it into one bowl. I sat at the table. I ate every bite. Daniel came through the kitchen at some point and stopped. He stood in the doorway, and I could feel him standing there without looking up. "That smells incredible," he said. "Thank you," I said. I didn't offer him any. I didn't not offer it to be cruel. I just didn't. I was eating my stew. It was mine. He went back to the other room, and I finished the whole bowl. Leo and I started walking home from the gym together somewhere around the 4th week. It wasn't a plan. He happened to be leaving as I was leaving, and we happened to be going the same direction, and we walked 3 blocks together talking about nothing in particular. A documentary he'd watched, a street fair coming up, whether the new coffee place on 5th was any good. But the nothing in particular added up. He asked about my work one evening, and I talked about it more than I had talked about anything in months. The project I was actually proud of. The client who was difficult. The thing I was trying to solve. He listened in the way that certain people do, where you can tell they're not waiting for their turn to talk, but are actually in the conversation with you. When we reached my building, he said, "You should let yourself be good at what you're good at." I stopped. "What do you mean?" He shrugged, a little self-conscious. "I don't know. You were just talking about your work like it might not be worth talking about, but it's clearly good work." I stood there on the sidewalk and felt something I didn't quite have a word for. Not attraction exactly, though maybe something adjacent to it. More like the feeling of being seen by someone who has no reason to see you a particular way. Just seen. "I've been working on that," I said. "I can tell," he said. He said goodnight and walked on. I stood outside my building for a moment longer than I needed to, breathing in the cool spring air. Daniel asked me, about 3 weeks before he moved out, if we could have dinner, not to negotiate. "What? Not to fight." He said, "I just want to have dinner, like people." I said yes. We went to a restaurant we'd been to once, early in the marriage, a place with white tablecloths and bread that came in a little cloth-lined basket. We ordered. We sat with our wine. "I've been thinking about something you said," he said. "About things that look like dinners." I waited. "I think I knew," he said. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at the breadbasket. "I think some part of me knew, when I said those things, that you'd just absorb them, that you wouldn't push back." He looked up, and I think I liked that. It was the most honest thing he had ever said to me. I felt the weight of it settle somewhere in my chest, not softening me, not changing anything about the decision I'd made, but acknowledging something real. He had been paying attention. In his own limited, damaging way, he had been paying attention. "Why are you telling me this now?" I said. He was quiet for a long time. "Because I need to understand it," he said, "even if it doesn't change anything." "It doesn't change anything," I said, gently. but I appreciate you saying it. We ate our dinner. We talked about small things. A movie, his sister's new apartment, whether the neighborhood had changed. It was, in its way, the most comfortable dinner we'd had in years. Maybe because nothing was at stake anymore. Maybe because I wasn't performing anything, and for once, neither was he. When we left, he held the door open for me, and I walked through it. Here is where I am now. It's a Sunday in late May. The windows are open, and the light coming through the kitchen is that particular gold that only happens in the late afternoon, when the sun is low enough to come in sideways and turn everything warm. I have people coming for dinner. Margot, obviously. Leo, who I invited 3 weeks ago, and who said yes, with a simplicity I still find refreshing. And my neighbor from the 3rd floor, an older woman named Helen, who always smells like good perfume, and once told me, in the elevator, that she used to cook professionally, and that she misses it. I am making lamb stew. I have been simmering it for 2.5 hours. The kitchen smells like rosemary and red wine, and something warm. I have added salt 3 times. I have tasted it each time. It is exactly right. Margot arrives first. She comes into the kitchen and she stops in the doorway the way people do when something smells like a memory. "Oh," she says. Just that. "Sit down," I tell her. "It's almost ready." She sits at the kitchen counter, on top of it actually, the way she used to when we were younger, and she watches me work and she says, "You look different." "Different how?" I ask. She thinks about it. "Like yourself," she says finally. I don't say anything. I stir the stew. The steam rises, and I think briefly of that December evening, and a man across a table tilting his head at a bowl I'd spent 3 hours on. And then I think of standing in my kitchen alone on a Sunday morning, eating it all myself, and the 2 images sit side by side in my head for just a moment before the second one quietly overtakes the first. Leo arrives at 6:30. He brings wine, a good one, and hands it over at the door with the same lack of ceremony he brings to everything. "You made enough for 5 people, he says, looking at the stove. "There are 4 of us," I say. "I'll eat for 2, he says. I laugh. It comes out easily, without effort, the way things do when you're not monitoring yourself. He sits next to Margot, and they start talking. They've met once before, and I listen to them while I finish the stew, and the kitchen is full of voices and warmth and the smell of something I made. Helen arrives last, a little breathless, holding a bottle of olive oil she'd apparently just decided to bring. "For the table," she says, pressing it into my hands. "You can never have too much." We sit down, 4 people around a table that had, for a long time, felt like a place where I was waiting to be corrected. I ladle the stew. I set a bowl down in front of each of them. Leo first, then Margot, then Helen. And then I sit down, and I serve myself. Margot picks up her spoon. She takes a bite. She closes her eyes for a second. When she opens them, she's looking right at me. "Nora," she says. "Yeah?" I say. She picks up her wine glass. She points it at me, just slightly, the way you do when you don't have a speech ready, but you want to say something true. "This," she says, "is everything." Leo tastes his. He says nothing for a moment, and then he says, very quietly, "I think this might be the best thing I've eaten in my life." Helen has already eaten half her bowl. She looks up and says simply, "Yes." I pick up my spoon. I taste it. I think, yes, it is. And I eat.